Tonight on KQED Newsroom, President Trump agreed to end a practice that separated thousands of immigrant children from their families at the border. But big questions and legal challenges remain. We get reaction from San Jose Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. She's co-authored a bill to protect immigrant families. Plus, a new documentary reveals the toll factory farming takes on the environment and human health. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with immigration. On Wednesday, President Trump signed an executive order ending the practice of separating immigrant children from their families at the border. The new order would allow families to be detained together. In April, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a, quote, zero-tolerance policy to criminally prosecute all illegal border crossings, even for those traveling with children and claiming asylum. Since then, more than 2,300 immigrant children have been separated from their parents and held in government-run shelters. Backlash to the practice has been intense among both Republicans and Democrats. On Monday, during a press briefing, Department of Homeland Security Chief Kirstjen Nielsen pushed back. She blamed Congress for the separation and said that detained children were well taken care of. Joining me now to discuss this is San Jose Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. She joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Congresswoman, nice to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Well, the Pentagon is now saying that it's preparing to house as many as 20,000 migrant children on 4 American military bases in Texas and in Arkansas. Are you getting any details on who would be housed there? For example, would the parents of the children also be there?
No, they've shared no information with me, which is alarming since I am the senior Democrat on the immigration subcommittee and we have jurisdiction over this issue.
What do you think, though, about that prospect of having these migrant family camps housing lots of people on military bases?
Well, I think it's a terrible idea and it's completely unnecessary. You know, if someone comes to the United States and seeks asylum, that's permitted under American law, you need to administer the law in an orderly fashion. You don't need to lock people up in order to have them show up at their immigration hearing. In fact, we had a program in existence during the Obama administration called the Family Case Management Program, where 100% of the families in the case management program showed up to their hearing. And then when they do, they either prevail, in which case they get asylum, or they don't prevail, in which case they have to leave.
What have you been feeling personally as you look at the images of children and families in detention centers? And have you had a chance to hear also the audio tape of children crying?
Yes. It's just so upsetting. You know, you can't look at this and listen to this and not think about how your own children were that age, and I have grandchildren, how I just identify with what would happen to them. And it's so, I've had members come up to me and of course they're having a hard time sleeping and living with really this trauma that's been inflicted on thousands of children. This is not the American way. This is not the country that I know and love. I am so ashamed of what our government is doing.
What do you think is the intent of the Trump administration then by separating these families in the first place, by having this so-called zero-tolerance policy on prosecuting people who cross the border?
Well, I take them at their word. I mean, John Kelly, the chief of staff, indicated that the intent was to deter others from coming to the United States to seek asylum, which is their right under American immigration law and also their right under treaties that we have ratified. So that's an impermissible reason, but it is apparently the reason.
And Congresswoman Lofgren, there are also conflicting reports about whether the Border Patrol will stop sending immigration cases to the Justice Department for prosecution in order to comply with the president's latest executive order. Can you clarify any of that? Is there indeed a halt to criminal prosecutions?
Well, I wish I could. We received the same press reports you did, that the prosecutions would be halted. Then the administration stepped forward to say that was incorrect. But we are getting reports from courtrooms across the United States that the Department of Justice is dismissing cases sort of en masse. So I don't really know the answer. I do think it's unprecedented to prosecute a misdemeanor in each and every case. It's never happened with any president, Republican or Democrat, and it will overwhelm the system completely.
Some have argued, though, including President Trump, that as heartbreaking as these scenes are of families being separated, the U.S. is a nation of laws, and that there should be consequences for those who break the law by entering this country illegally. What would you say to people who feel that way?
We are a nation of laws, and we ought to administer them in an orderly fashion. If you enter the United States, you make a plea for asylum, as the law provides. That should be reviewed, and a judge will make a decision, and if you prevail, you'll get asylum. And if you don't, you'll have to leave. If you don't make a claim for asylum and merely enter without permission, you're going to be sent back across the border. That's nothing new. So what is new is the president trying to terrorize small children and create chaos at the border. That is unfortunate.
Have you asked, or will you ask, to visit the detention centers where the children are being held or where the mothers are being held?
Absolutely. A number of members of Congress are going on Monday. Other members went last weekend. Unfortunately, I think this Trump-created crisis is going to be with us for a while, and I intend, and many other members of Congress intend, to go and see with our own eyes how these children are being treated.
House Republican leaders have delayed until next week a vote on a bill that would not only fund a border wall, provide a path to citizenship for dreamers, but also keep migrant families together. Where do you stand on that bill?
Well, the bill is really much worse than you've just described. It would repeal existing areas of law that allow American families to be reunited with their sons and daughters. It would create long-term detention for immigrant families. And I don't think the solution to the crisis is to throw the mother in the cage with the toddler and throw away the key. And for the dreamers, it provides such an attenuated process that if you were 27 years old and a dreamer, you'd be 55 years old before you were able to get your U.S. citizenship. I think that's absurd.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C.
You bet.
As you just heard Congresswoman Lofgren say, many questions remain about the president's executive order to stop separating families at the border. It's unclear if those already separated will be reunited, and if so, when. The president's order also calls for indefinite detention, but that contradicts a 1997 federal court settlement barring children from being detained for more than 20 days. Meanwhile, advocates have been raising concerns about the damaging effects of forced separation on children. The president of the American Academy of Pediatrics said conditions in detention facilities are, quote, traumatizing, and that alternatives to detention exist. And joining me now for a deeper look at these issues are Julian Aguilar, immigration and border security reporter with the Texas Tribune. He joins us via Skype from Texas. Also, attorney Spencer Amdur with the ACLU Immigrant Rights Project. And Chandra Ghosh-Ippen, a child psychologist and associate director of the Child Trauma Research Program at UCSF. Welcome to all of you. And Chandra, I'd like to begin with you. As a child psychologist, what are your concerns about separating children from their parents in this manner?
So I want to take us all to that moment when that child is crying on the tape and think about how hard it is.
This is the ProPublica tape you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And how hard it is for us to listen to that. And then take those sounds and imagine that they continue. They continue for way longer than 7 minutes, and they're inside this child. And you'll feel that child's sense of alarm and desperation, and you'll see that there is nobody who's able to comfort this child. And let's all think about the long-term damage that does to that child. There's the short-term damage, and then there's the long-term damage in terms of fears that other people will leave them even after they're reunited with their loved ones, in terms of symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, as they grow older, even as their parents worrying that their own children might be separated from them. This is long-term damage, and this is something that we've caused. We did work with one child who was separated at the border because when he arrived at the border, he had spiked a high fever. And so immigration wouldn't let him cross and quarantined him. So he was sent, and this was one of the best kind of possible things, his grandmother came to lovingly take care of him. He experienced symptoms for years after that. Actually, that's why his parents ended up coming, because he didn't understand, why would you leave me? So in this moment, when you're so stressed out, you most want your parent there. And if you're very little, you don't understand why they can't be there. Also, if you've seen scenes of people like border police saying, no, you can't be there, then they've really kind of showed you in some ways that your parent is not worthy of respect, that your parent can be damaged. Maybe you've seen something even worse, and you've left alone, stranded, all by themselves to deal with those memories.
And do those memories and the trauma cause regression later on? Do they stop speaking, for example?
It can. I think it really depends what follows. So what you would really want is for the child to have loving adults, right? Because children can recover with the help of loving adults who help them make meaning. If, however, the grown-ups are traumatized, if there are no grown-ups, if nobody really sits with the child and says it makes sense that you're scared, that you've been through this, and what we see is like children communicate through play. So they'll sort of play scenes out where they'll put a child all by themselves, stranded, and they are sort of saying kind of, why did this happen? Why did you leave me alone? And to the degree that a grown-up can help them to understand, then they can recover. But otherwise, it would be really normal for them to have sleep problems, for them to have difficulty concentrating. And we often would say, oh, this child, can't focus. But what we'd say is they're focusing on danger. Right? They're focusing on the fact that this could happen. They're worried that you could leave them at any moment. So we'd see heightened separation anxiety. In the long term, without help, we would see depression. We would see continued symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, recurrent fears. And we can even see, we could, imagine as they're aging, like as they're growing, and one day they become parents, loving parents to a child. Well, it would make sense that even as parents, you would worry that bad things could happen. You would think, wow, when I was this child's age, I was not with my parent.
Spencer, take us to what happens at these ports of entry at the border. What is the process that kids go through when they're separated from their parents?
Yeah, so when kids have been separated over the last few weeks and months, they're typically shipped across the country very quickly. So we're seeing parents who come in, they sit in a detention center for a day, 2 days, 3 days with their child. And then border guards come in, sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes they'll tell the parent, I'm just going to take your kid to get a bath. They'll be right back. And then only hours later does it become clear that the child actually isn't coming back. They've left. And so children are being taken, to Chicago, to Washington State, to New York State, and they're put in detention centers specifically for children.
And their parents have no idea where they are. Are they told where they're going?
They often aren't. We're hearing that there are hundreds and hundreds of parents who have no idea where their children are. I think that's really important to emphasize now that we're in a place where we have these 2,000 children to reunite with their parents, is that the Trump administration separated these children so carelessly that parents have no idea where they are, but sometimes the government doesn't even have any idea where the kid is and who their parent is.
Julian, I want to bring you in at this point. You've interviewed families who have been separated. Are there some commonalities you're seeing as to why they're leaving their home countries and their experiences once they're separated?
The majority of them tell us that they're leaving because of violence, whether they're from the states of Michoacan in Mexico, or whether they're from Honduras or El Salvador. That's the common theme, that the conditions were just too horrible. They didn't feel like the police were able or willing to protect them, so they sought refuge here in the United States.
Spencer, we're now getting into this legal realm where President Trump is trying to get a judge to modify an order that says basically children who are kept in detention cannot be kept for more than 20 days. The Obama administration challenged that, tried to get modified 2016. The judge said no. What are the chances that the judge would take a different stand this time around?
Well, I think what's important to underscore, first of all, is that there's no law that actually compels family separation. So even when this was litigated under the Obama administration, as Julian said, parents weren't being routinely separated from their kids. And that's because there's a very easy way to comply with this pre-existing court order when a family comes together, which is to let them apply for asylum from the outside. They don't have to be detained while they pursue their asylum applications. And in fact, it's perfectly legal to come here and apply for asylum. So that's one thing to say. The other thing to say is that nothing about the court's order forces the government to inflict this terrible trauma on children. The whole point of the Flores settlement is to protect children from bad conditions of confinement and to make sure that they're in that they can be with their families and they can be safe. And so, in a situation where, for whatever reason, they absolutely can't be released or they can't be released yet, nothing about the Flores settlement compels family separation.
And so, Chandra, I'm also curious. There have been reports that as these families are detained, the children are detained, Border Patrol agents and other personnel are apparently being told not to try to console the children. Why would that be the case?
Well, I think what we can think about is people are worried about being accused perhaps of molesting the children. And that, unfortunately, what we all know is that what children need, especially young children, is physical comfort, in particular from their loved ones. So having a stranger comfort you may actually not be comforting, but if you do gain the trust of the children and you can be in a place where you're in public, where it makes sense, being able to just touch someone simply, being able to say that we're looking for your parent, to provide some reassurance, vocal tone, a little hug, that's really what's going to help the children to feel like we care, to feel safe again, and also it'll help them at a neurobiological level. Right now, what we're hearing is that some children are being medicated. And to really think about, is that an alternative to human touch? Which one is really more damaging? And again, though, what we would say is really the number one intervention would be to connect them to their parents.
And Julian, I'm also curious on the Texas border towns that you've been visiting. What has been the reaction? Is there sympathy for the migrant families, or are people simply saying, you know what, they broke the law and this is what needs to happen?
Oh, you bring up a question that I think has been passed around for years, and I think it's not an even split. You have a lot of folks that say, hey, there's a legal process, and I'm sorry, but, look at what Mexico does to Central Americans, and they use examples of what happens in other countries when immigration laws, even if they're just civil infractions, are violated. But I think in this case, there's been just a tremendous outpouring of support that sort of overwhelms the negative. I mean, we set up on the Texas Tribune page just a little story that has links to where people can go and donate, whatever it is that they can, legal services. And that's been the most viewed or clicked on site for the last 3 or 4 days. You have people emailing reporters, calling reporters saying, hey, I read this, I want to help, I'll get down to Texas as soon as I can. So I think that is for the people that have been really affected by this in a negative way, that's sort of the glass half full situation there.
And Spencer, I know the ACLU has filed a lawsuit asking a judge to bar the Trump administration from separating families. How does this new executive order affect your lawsuit?
So the lawsuit is still going forward because there are now over 2,000 children who are stranded in detention centers by themselves away from their parents. And so what we've asked the judge to do is to expand the lawsuit to a nationwide class action and to order the government to reunify all of these parents with their children. The judge hasn't ruled on that request yet, but he did rule about 2 weeks ago that to separate children from their parents in the circumstances of our clients, who are representative of what's happening nationwide, violates due process. The judge called it brutal and offensive, and he said that it arbitrarily tears at the sacred bond between parent and child. So I think he made very clear that this is illegal, and we actually have a conference with him later today in which we're going to discuss what the next stage in the case is now that the executive order has come down.
Chandra, I know you have written books for kids to help them cope with traumatic disasters such as earthquakes, wildfires. If you were now to write another children's book for these children in these migrant detention centers, what would you say to the children?
So I have started a book. It's called We Have One World, and it would be a free coloring book for kids. And it's really the idea of our world and countries and what's a border, why people cross it, kind of the beauty of their story, and really helping parents and children to connect. I think the challenges that I'm having is when I've written the other disaster books, I've been able to say things like the grown-ups are there, the grown-ups are protective, the grown-ups are coming together, we're all pulling for you, that we believe that children are the most important special thing and that it is our responsibility. And right now I haven't been able to write the ending because I can't say that. And that's the hardest thing, is that in a natural disaster, we pull together and we support all the children. And this is a man-made disaster, and we haven't done that yet. And that's what I think we're all here fighting for.
Okay. Well, I see the heartbreak on your face as you talk about this. I want to thank you all for your time. Julian Aguilar with the Texas Tribune, thank you for joining us. And also Spencer Amder with the ACLU and Chandra Ghosh-Ippen, child psychologist with UCSF. It's really been nice to have all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A new documentary offers a sobering look at factory farming, where animals live in cramped conditions and are pumped with antibiotics to grow quickly and uniformly. A group of farmers is fighting this trend by sharing their methods to raise livestock more sustainably and humanely. They're reviving so-called heritage breeds of poultry and pigs that have been largely forgotten for decades as factory farming took over. And joining me now are director and producer Christopher Quinn and the founder of Good Shepherd Poultry Ranch, Frank Reese. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Christopher, do you have a problem with eating meat, or is it just where that meat comes from and how the animals are raised?
Well, one of the things I learned making this film is that commodity birds, or birds that come from factory farming, are hybridized in such a way that their growth is so accelerated that they ultimately, ready to go to market in 30 short days or so.
So they're bioengineered from the time they're born to the time they go to market. It's just 30 days?
Yeah. So the issue I have is also that these animals, from the waking moment that they're born, they're suffering mightily because they've been hybridized to grow at such an accelerated rate.
Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is the real welfare issue to me. To me, 90% of all suffering of turkeys, chickens, hogs, whatever, has to do not with so much how they're raised. I mean, that is important, but it's what we have done to these animals to increase productivity. That we have increased their rate of growth so much, that we have changed their skeletal structure, that we have changed their muscle structure, to the point when you select for these certain characteristics, it affects other things. And so I just can't support that type of farming.
What are your thoughts on how the meat and poultry industry have changed over the past several decades in this country?
Well, I'm old enough to have seen it happen. I've watched it move from being an independent farm situation in which hundreds and thousands of individual farmers raised chickens and turkeys and sold eggs and sold pigs and brought it into their local market, to where now just 2 companies worldwide control it all.
And your documentary spends quite a bit of time talking about the impact on the environment. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, raising our food, it's one of the leading causes of greenhouse gases, and the methane that comes from raising cattle is enormous, and it's either the 1 or 2 top contributors to global warming. That's another reason why I kind of scaled back on eating meat too, is when you start to see the impact on the environment, which is enormously significant. And, in 50 years, we'll be up to 9 billion people on the planet. And if we continue to consume meat on the level, and if South Asia and East Asia start to adopt the so-called Western diet, we're going to find ourselves in real trouble.
How are your practices different from factory farming?
I actually own all my own genetics. I own the parents, the grandparents. I collect the eggs, I set the eggs, and I hatch the eggs, and I raise the turkeys. Same way with the chickens. So this is very different than the industrial model.
And do they taste different from the mass-produced
Yes,
turkeys?
I've heard this from everybody. Even some of the food scientists from the University of Arkansas or from Kansas State University that have done research, who have actually said there's a direct taste difference. And it's a combination of the biggest thing to me, of course, I think, is the genetics and how that meat is laid down genetically and slowly in a natural animal. The other is the environment, that my birds can run, jump, and fly and are free to do so.
So given that the system is what it is it realistic then to expect that a lot of people can give up the cheaper meats that are factory farms? Because you will get into this issue of, poorer communities can't afford to pay more for their food.
When you actually look at a burger, for instance, so-called inexpensive meat that anybody can afford, that 99-cent burger, actually, when you externalize the cost of subsidies and health care, because this is a diet that's not very good for you, that burger just lands south of $100. So in a way, we're all paying for it.
The reason it costs more is I don't own the whole system. I don't own the processing plant. I don't own the feed companies. I don't own the shipping and the trucking and the refrigeration. And that's where all the cost is.
And Christopher, early in your film, you focus a lot on Colonel Sanders and Kentucky Fried Chicken. So what role did KFC play in transforming the meat industry in this country?
This was really the beginning of us wanting cheap and efficient food, and that really took hold in the 60s and really took shape in the 70s. And that came with a price, and we slowly changed our food system to a place where we have mass-produced chicken that might be inexpensive, but in a lot of ways it's really a costly endeavor for all of us.
So why do you think this film is needed now? What has changed that you think is critical for this film to be out now?
People are adopting the Western diet. Fast food is becoming more readily available in India and China. And this is a big concern when you think of the billions of people that live there. And this is going to have a real effect on our environment. And it's really up to us to make the decision of how we're going to eat and how we're going to make our way into the future. And scaling back on cheap commodity meat seems to be a solution that we all have to start to address.
And Frank, what would you like people to know about the meat and poultry that they do consume?
You know, that's really hard for me because I hate to tell anybody what they can do or can't do. But if you do care about certain things, you know, and you wish to try to buy poultry that is higher in nutrition or that is better for the environment or better for the animal, then seek out the best you can. Preferably that which has been certified by the American Poultry Association as being truly heritage or standard bred poultry. Then you know you're getting the best of all of these things. But this, you know, it's so new and it's just getting started and we're hoping to grow that it's not available for a lot of places.
All right, thank you very much for that. Frank Reese with Good Shepherd Turkey Ranch in Kansas, and also filmmaker Christopher Quinn. Nice to have you both here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eating Animals opens in Bay Area theaters this weekend. And that will do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.